Thank you very much, Lily, for that very kind and generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I have to say, I'm honored to serve on Secretary Kerry's International Security Advisory Board, but the comments I give are purely my own and do not represent the views of that board, of the State Department, or of the U.S. Government. I'm delighted to see so many students here. Maybe some of you here have read some of my articles, but I would guess that very few of you, other than the students, have seen my video clips on the Colbert Report. That's, when I go to speak at schools, that's primarily how they know me. I've given hundreds of interviews in my life, and the one with Stephen Colbert was by far the most difficult. I've never met anybody as smart as he is, who can think as quickly. As a result, if you Google Colbert nuclear, you get me. I show up on the Google site. As Lily mentioned, I'm the president of Plowshares Fund. We are a foundation that focuses solely on nuclear weapons policy. For 32 years now, we've been raising funds and finding the best people with the smartest ideas around the world on how to reduce the nuclear threats. We are a public foundation. We rely on the donations of our generous donors. So if any of you either have money or need money, please see me after this talk. I'm here today because I've written a new book called Nuclear Nightmares. We built a special website for it called nuclearnightmaresbook.com, which gives you some idea of what the book is about and helps explore the main themes of the book. And you can go up to that website and track the other events I'll be doing around the country, or see some of the articles I've written. What I'd like to do today is give you a brief overview of what this book is about, the threats we face today. And I want to particularly focus, I'll probably spend about half the talk, on the subject of Iran. I think it's something that all of us want to talk about at this point. It's in the news, and it's probably the most pressing nuclear challenge that we face. I would guess that very few of you woke up this morning thinking about nuclear weapons. You know, why would you? Most people think of nuclear weapons as a leftover from the Cold War, these weapons that don't have much to do with our current security challenges. If you think of them at all, you think of them probably in terms of Iran, and you may believe that the threats they represented are things of the past, or that we have programs in place that can deal with these threats. You'd be dead wrong. It's understandable that we don't think about these weapons anymore. We are confronted every day with formidable challenges in our personal lives, in our family, in our schools, in our community or state. But of all the threats and problems we face every day, there really are only two that threaten devastation on a planetary scale, and that's global warming and nuclear weapons. Both of these can affect our lives in unprecedented ways. Both of these threaten a dramatic change, if the worst should happen, in the way we live, in the very question of whether we can continue to live. Both of these are caused by machines that we invented. But both of these threats are preventable, even reversible, but they require new ways of thinking and new, bold government leaders to put policies into place. I'm going to talk today about the nuclear threats that we face. We ignore these threats at our peril. If you think that somebody else is taking care of this, or that we don't have to worry about this, think again. Think again. The risk of a nuclear accident, of the use of a nuclear weapon, is low, but should a nuclear weapon be used again in the world, it would have devastating physical, financial, and political impact. There's generally three categories of threats that we worry about. The national security strategy of the United States says that the greatest threat the United States itself faces today is from nuclear weapons, specifically the risk that a terrorist group might get a nuclear weapon and use it on a U.S. city, a nuclear 9/11. There's also the risk, the strategy says, of new states acquiring these weapons, perhaps states who have less restraint on the use of these weapons and might use them in a regional conflict or to threaten the United States. When, in this case, we often think of Iran, which does not yet have a nuclear weapon but is building the technological capability to develop a weapon should they decide to do so, and North Korea, which just in the past 10 years has conducted 3 nuclear tests and is on the verge of consolidating as a nuclear weapon state. For this reason, the National Security Strategy of the United States says this has got to be our top priority. I have to admit, the policies of the United States have not matched that strategic analysis. The United States itself does not focus that much attention on these 3 threats. The President of the United States tried to change that when he came into office. President Obama came into office having worked in the Senate on nuclear policy. One of the first things he did was seek out Republican Senator Richard Lugar from Indiana and ask Senator Lugar to take him along when he went to the former states of the Soviet Union to watch how government programs were helping to control and contain and eliminate the threat of the leftover nuclear weapons, the leftover nuclear materials that resulted when the Soviet Union collapsed. Obama was deeply affected by that, and I started to adopt this in the Senate as one of his primary causes. He also worked with Republican Senator Chuck Hagel to fashion some of the most comprehensive nonproliferation legislation ever presented to the U.S. Senate. And that relationship, as you can see, continues today with Secretary Hagel being his secretary, with Senator Hagel being his Secretary of Defense, and Richard Lugar still a close confidant of the president's. In fact, President Obama focused on nuclear policy in his very first national security address in Prague in April 2009. And there he laid out the vision of a world without nuclear weapons. The idea that we should move step by step to eliminate these weapons, and he married that vision up with a series of practical measures to address the various aspects of the nuclear threat. The first were the 2 I've mentioned. He said we have to redouble our efforts to secure all nuclear materials around the world. The really good news is that a terrorist can't build a nuclear weapon from scratch. They don't have the facilities, the infrastructure to build the material, the highly enriched uranium or plutonium of a bomb. It takes an industrial facility with billions of dollars invested, with gigawatts of energy to make that material. This should be Hillary Clinton's next book. It takes a nation to build nuclear material. It's a national enterprise. But if a terrorist can get that material, it's then a relatively easier step to construct it into a crude nuclear device, easier still to smuggle it into a country, and of course there's no shortage of suicide bombers ready to detonate it. So President Obama pledged to bring together world leaders to tighten up the security around the known stockpiles of these materials and to eliminate that wherever possible. This developed into what he then called these nuclear security summits, which continue to this day, a new pillar in our non-proliferation efforts, a new level of unified international efforts to secure nuclear materials to prevent that nuclear terrorism. In addition, the president laid out new efforts to prevent new states from getting these weapons. He specifically focused on North Korea and Iran. And the actions that he then took, in fact, built on the efforts of the Bush administration to build up international sanctions and restrictions on Iran. And as a result, we now have today the toughest sanctions on Iran that have ever been imposed on any country in peacetime. It's a result of this international cooperation, the patient work of diplomacy that has tightened the noose on Iran, that has brought Iran to the bargaining table in Geneva. The third platform, the third element of the president's agenda was reducing our existing nuclear arsenals. Now, this is something we actually don't think that much about. We used to have 30,000 nuclear weapons in the U.S. arsenal back in the height of the Cold War in the 1980s. That number is reduced to about 8,000, about 5,000 in the active stockpile. And we normally don't think of these weapons